Hi there, and welcome to this edition of A Conversation About. And this one was prompted actually by some research or an article I was reading relatively recently about the evolving role of the CDO. And one of the things it highlighted was that the average tenure is around 18 to 30 months or so. And that kind of reminded me about Thomas Hobbes' sort of view of the nature of the life of man as often being solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And I was kind of curious as to why that might be. You know, what is it about the role or the way that the role's evolving that means that sometimes it can feel like that. And so to do that, I turned to an old friend of mine, Ian Thomas. Ian had a lengthy career with Microsoft in the advertising sort of tech industry before then moving into a number of CDO roles. And so I called him up and I said, well, why don't we have a conversation about this? And I'm glad he accepted, and I hope you enjoy it.
So Ian, hi, great to catch up again. How's it going?
Hi Neil, yeah, it's great. It's great to catch up with you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, no, it was no, you're very welcome. And in fact, there's been quite a lot of stuff. I don't know, just sort of you look on LinkedIn and other places recently, they've been sort of questioning the sort of the role of the CDAO, and to some extent, you know, as I sort of said in the intro, what can be a sort of perceived as a short and brutish life of a CDO. In fact, I was looking up some statistics to maybe just support that, and I read somewhere that the average tenure they're saying these days of a CDO is somewhere between the 18-month to sort of kind of 2.5 years mark, whereas you know a CEO is 3 to 5 years. So I was kind of thinking, well, the average CEO kind of gets through the average CDO, two average CDOs in the space of that time. And it's sort of, you know, it's not like, you know, it isn't like a kind of new role these days. And so I thought, you know, we've both sort of like been in the role and, you know, probably sort of got a few war stories and, you know, a few scars perhaps as well. But it'd be good to have a conversation with you about that. And actually, you know, because I know you love Gen AI and ChatGPT and that kind of stuff. So I kind of asked ChatGPT. I've got the answer here. I said, why is it that CDOs don't have long tenure? And the first thing it came back with was evolution of the role. You know, the role of a CDO is still relatively new and evolving. You know, I would argue with the relatively new bit, but many organizations are still figuring out where the CDO fits in the structure and how best to leverage data as a strategic asset. And this leads to uncertainty about the role and where it fits and that kind of stuff. So maybe we'll just kick off with that. You know, what are your thoughts about the role itself and how it's evolving?
Yeah, well, as you know, Neil, because you and I have been in various CDO dinners over the last few years, whenever 2 or 3 CDOs are gathered together in one place, you know, then they shall debate where in the organization the CDO should sit and what their actual job is. I think that it still is evolving, and things like generative AI and the rise of AI more broadly is continuing to influence that evolution and kind of upset the apple cart, just as we sort of, you know, got a bit of a handle on it. You know, back 4 or 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, maybe CDO role was very much about compliance. GDPR drove a lot of CDO role investments, and so people were very focused on privacy and governance and compliance and so on. And now that's changed, and so yes, it is continuing to evolve. It makes it really hard. You know, and you know, we both experienced this when a CDO role comes up, to kind of figure out what kind of role it's going to be.
Right. What actually do they mean? Yeah,
exactly. And so, and it's often you don't know that until you get in the role. You go, okay, it's this one. And matching the CDO that an organization is hiring to the actual role and responsibilities that, you know, that need to be executed is you know, still pretty challenging for a lot of organizations, I think.
Yeah. And you know, how do you think, because funnily enough, that sort of lack of clarity of responsibilities was the second sort of, you know, bullet point that came out of the conversation. I mean, how do organizations, do you think, what should they be thinking about when they're hiring a CDO, and why are mistakes still being made? Is it a lack of education at senior stakeholder levels? Is it a lack of realization within, I don't know, the recruitment community? And what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem.
Yeah.
Which is, a lot of orgs don't know what they don't know. I'm doing an interim CDO role right now for a small client, and job number one has been to explain to them what the heck a data team even is. Data function. Yeah, they're quite a small growing organization, but it's still, there are larger organizations where the concept of a data function and a data functional capability within an organization is really poorly understood. And so you have this, as I say, this kind of this chicken and egg issue where you need to bring somebody in who can help define what that is, but it's just a massive crapshoot as to whether that person turns out then to be the right person to lead that function. And so it's not necessarily, and you probably agree with this because you and I both held interim roles. A way of solving that is to bring in an interim CDO who does that exploratory piece, gets things off the ground, defines the rules of the game and the proposition within the organization, and then makes a very kind of hopefully low stress decision of whether they want to move on to another project elsewhere or stick and grow things a bit longer. But there's still plenty of organizations where they hire this person. They're like, oh, you've got to build us a 6-year, 7-year plan, and then that person gets a year in. They're like, yeah, it's not for me, and they leave, and everybody feels bad. But it's not necessarily the worst thing to cycle that out and get the right person, as long as you plan for it ahead of time.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting points there. I reflect on myself in that the sort of you talked about that sort of the original CDO role was probably heavily more about that sort of compliance and management, data management sort of focus, what I call that sort of defensive strategy piece, where, it's very much around the, on the left-hand side of the value chain, where it's all about data management and perhaps some insight generation and, a few dashboards and that kind of stuff. And then obviously, I guess, historically, those kinds of roles have been filled with people who come up through that more, what you might call technical, kind of function. And I always describe that as being, necessary but not sufficient in terms of the value generation, kind of side. And it kind of feels to me that sometimes, the role, the title of the role itself is sort of pinning you into that kind of space, even if, as you and I probably both are more on the, what do we do with this stuff? How do we deliver value? How do we actually increase, beneficial business outcomes? And, so do you think the role, the title of the role itself is probably, I don't know, out of date, or, should we be called different stuff now, or,
Well, yeah, it's a good point. I did a round table a few months ago of a group of CDOs where I said to them, I kind of laid out the straw man idea. I said, if the CDO job, if we were all really effective at our jobs, then there would be no such thing as a CDO. You wouldn't need one. And it's a little bit of a strained analogy, but I, recall, if you think back in the early 20th century when companies were embracing electricity, and figuring out how to electrify their factories and so on. They would have had people whose job it was to figure out how to use electricity in their organization. I don't think there were ever any chief electricity officers, but there were people like thinking about like, what can we do with this electricity stuff? And now, if you said to somebody, who's in charge of your electricity strategy, they'd be like, are you insane? And maybe in the future, organizations that just have data so suffused within their way of working and their expectations that a explicit CDO role is not deemed to be necessary. That said, I find it hard to conceive of a situation where there isn't some kind of centralized capability within an organization that is managing the enterprise data, thinking about the governance and the management of that, and thinking about creating a kind of platform of data for the data and then sort of analytics and insights and so on, and AI. And will the person leading that be the CDO or the CDAIO or the CAIO or whatever? There'll probably be some version of it, but it'll be nice. As I say, it'll be nice if we kind of did ourselves out of a job, at some point.
Yeah, but to perhaps slightly torture your analogy, then but in those early days, you would have had someone almost to explain what electricity could do for the organisation, and to stop the sort of, it's a phrase I've used in the past, stop making your light bulbs look like candles, and sort of actually take the benefits of new technology and actually apply it in different kinds of way. So, perhaps in a way, I kind of get your point about doing ourselves out of a job, but I think there's a long while perhaps there, other than the usual heat-seeking kind of organisations. But it then does sound like essentially it's a transformation role. It's a continuous transformation role along a long spectrum of data maturity then, and that probably the majority, the early adopters are already there, and the majority are just beginning to move out of that sort of defensive strategy phase into the offensive, or as I call it, the really offensive data strategy phase, when you're actually trying to deliver the value.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where the CDO title holds people back a bit, and then maybe it should be C, little d, big A, AI, whatever, O.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, in many ways, it's a sort of chief transformation officer type role, and the challenge is that as you were saying with the kind of the electricity example, is that still a lot of people don't know what they can achieve with electricity, or with data rather. They figured it out with electricity now, and so you need somebody who can kind of lead the horse to water on these ideas. But you and I would probably agree that it's got to be, this person who's doing this is really super plugged into the overall company strategy, and doing that kind of strategic, kind of connective job of figuring out how to support the strategy with data and insights and analytics, but also figuring out how to kind of influence the strategy with data. And when electricity came along, people didn't just electrify their existing factories, they completely redesigned their factories, because electricity enabled them to design factories differently. And that transformation is, I think, it's the more interesting part of the role. It's very challenging for CDOs, because I think most organizations, they hire CDOs and they kind of intrinsically think of them as operational roles. So they give them this big old portfolio of stuff, or either that, or they give them nothing at all and just have it be an influence role, and that's a different kind of misery, which I've certainly but if it's a CDO role with a team, then it's like, oh, you've got all this stuff to deliver, and we've got to make a decision on this new data lake replatforming we're doing, and blah blah blah, and they're all stuck in the weeds trying to get stuff done day to day, but they're also expected to be this sort of cheerleader in chief for data within the organization. It's a real challenge.
Yeah, and I guess possibly not those again who have been brought up, or have developed their careers, not been brought up, but developed their careers within a sort of a technical function. It's not part of their natural development criteria. You become a chief architect by being a chief architect, by being the chief architect, don't you? Not by being the chief influencer within the organization. So potentially they're challenging. I mean, I've been sort of thinking about this quite a lot, and the sort of, it feels to me that whoever is leading that function, however you want to describe it, data and analytics, AI, whatever. And I think AI is probably a little bit, there are data and analytics functions that use AI, but there are plenty that don't. AI is used in plenty of functions which aren't about analytics, and so that's probably a discussion for another day. But that role kind of almost needs to be now much more sort of business focused, even consultative, as you were saying, sort of strategically orientated, and almost chief translator from stuff the business wants to do to stuff that needs to be kind of delivered. And that really was a very strong technical head of data platforms kind of person role to actually then be the delivery engine kind of for that, and that shift probably needs to be sort of the one that people look at.
Yeah, no, that's right, and it's an interesting thing. This, data isn't the only place where people who've come up from the detail can struggle when they get to the more executive level, because they have the curse of knowledge. So they kind of know too much about how difficult things are in practice, or where there are gaps in the data. I've certainly felt this myself. And at one level, it's a strength because you can leverage that same data to come up with ideas. But some of the most impactful data leaders I've worked for, who have also been some of the most infuriating data leaders I've worked for, are those who haven't understood the data tremendously well, but they're really focused on driving value with business stakeholders. And there's been a fair amount of kind of BS, in their pitches from time to time, that people like me, who've been more on the executional side, have sort of had to just bite our tongues and sort of say, okay, well, we'll figure out how to do that thing you just promised to the stakeholder. But I'm actually always appreciative, as an intrinsically kind of analytical person myself, who likes to be super facts-based, which obviously again is a kind of psychologically very common sort of personality type within data. I've actually always been very appreciative of those people who, even though I might find it uncomfortable in the moment, are out there trying to push boundaries on what can be done, and then come back and saying, figure it out. And so I do think that it depends on the organization, but there are organizations where the right person to lead the data function is a really seasoned business strategist who may be reasonably quantitative in their approach to things and so on, but is really good and has maybe already got, I know, some CDOs I've spoken to here in the UK, this mold where they really understand the business. They're from the business. They're kind of the business, so they're trusted, and they can affect change that is difficult to achieve coming at it from more of the technology side.
So what do you think, sort of, and I hate it when people ask me this question, so I apologize. I don't really, but 2-3 years time out, what will we be calling it? Who will be doing it? Will it still exist, kind of thing, in 30 seconds, sort of thing?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. The hardest question to answer is what we'll be calling it. I think it will exist. As I say, leading a data function for an organization will still be a very important role. Where will it go? I think you'll see maybe an increasing number going under the CIO, but with the CIO role evolving to include AI. And without, this goes over the 30-second rule, but the emergence of generative AI as a big sort of set of use cases within enterprises suddenly unlocks a whole bunch of data that CDOs historically haven't worked with very much, which is all the unstructured document data. And that's really the CIO's gig, or has historically been. So I think we will see some CDOs become explicitly CDAIOs, depending on the type of organization. Others where they have more of a kind of a partnership with the CIO. And what I would hope to see is that the CIO role, then, the profile of people in that role turns to being more in, where the actual I of information is a better descriptor of their role rather than just being a glorified CTO. And in that case, you might have some quite nice, profitable relationships between CIOs and CDOs, where they're kind of joining forces to address the structured and unstructured sort of data challenges within the org. But as I say, the day-to-day stuff of making sure that all your enterprise data is well managed and is delivering value day in, day out and doesn't degrade and so on, that stuff's not going away. You need somebody to run that.
Yeah. I mean, breaking my own rule. I mean, because you triggered a thought there, which is obviously there is a whole community of people who have, been brought up dealing with semi-structured and to some extent unstructured data, and that's the digital analytics community. So maybe, this will be their breakthrough kind of opportunity over the next few years. Who knows? Because those senior ones will be coming. They'll be sort of head of functions, etc., these days. So who knows? Yeah. Anyway, great, Ian. as always, great to sort of catch up and chew the cud on these sorts of things, and maybe get you back in a few years' time and see where we are.
Yeah, that's great to chat, Neil. Thanks again for inviting me.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Bye for now.